Let's flip over to Bitcoin. This is another trade that's been under quite a bit of pressure recently, trading just around $43,000 today. One of the reasons that we've seen it decline recently has been some of the concerns around Bitcoin's energy consumption. So we want to talk about this with Rob Chang. He's the CEO of Gryphon, and it's a company, a Bitcoin mining company that recently raised $14 million to build out all renewable, zero carbon crypto mining. So Rob, it's great to have you. You're one of the leaders in this space. I guess first just break down, because I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. People don't really get a sense of exactly how much energy Bitcoin consumes when we're talking about the mining part of it. So I guess just explain to us how big Bitcoin's carbon footprint is.
Well, Bitcoin's carbon footprint is relatively large when you look at it just on its own. But I think a little bit of perspective needs to be had, because when you compare it to the banking system or the amount of energy used for Facebook to host videos and whatnot, it's really not that large when you compare that. And I harken back to thinking about when a new technology shows up and people argue one thing just because it happens to be topical. I would say that when the car was introduced, you could say that the energy used to make a car was probably a lot more than riding a horse, but nowadays no one's riding horses. So I think we're looking at it the wrong way, and that we should look at the utility of Bitcoin as opposed to focusing so much on the cost of it.
So following up on that, though, you're going to use a totally sustainable energy source for crypto mining. Why go that route? It takes electricity, it takes energy, and right now that's carbon to print a dollar bill. If Bitcoin's getting a bad rap, why take the steps you're taking?
Well, it certainly makes sense to do it the best way possible. So if there is an economic way, and we believe there is, way to mine Bitcoin in the most environmentally friendly way possible, it absolutely makes sense to do so. And we at Gryphon fully agree with that. And so from the very outset, when we founded the company in the summer of last year, we focused on ESG principles, most notably, of course, the environmental side. And because of that, we've already achieved 100% carbon-free status, in that our current energy use is 100% hydro. And we are looking towards building facilities that are 100% renewable as well, such as wind, but other areas such as solar and nuclear as well.
Rob, when we talk about the timeline of this, getting more and more miners on board, the fact that we could potentially, it sounds like if everyone cooperates, we could transition this to renewable energy and talking about green Bitcoin. But what does the timeline for that potentially look like?
It's doable now, I believe. For example, we were able to find 100% renewable energy through hydro right off the bat. So why can't others? And I think partially it is because the thinking process is, for some reason, if it's renewable, it has to be more expensive. And that's certainly not the case. Our costs are just as competitive with others. And when you start factoring in the potential for credits, there are situations where it's arguable that you could get costs lower than everyone else when you start adding those in. So I think it's more a matter of changing the way companies that mine approach the search for electricity, as opposed to just default thinking that it's going to be more expensive, because it absolutely isn't. And we are a case of that.
Yeah, when I'm thinking about your electricity is, I think you said produced by, is it water? Is it hydro?
It's hydro, right?
I was just thinking, we buy electricity from Canada, and all of the electricity, I think it's in Quebec, comes from hydro. So we could make that argument. But you've got some big names behind you. Among them was the whistleblower from Cambridge Analytica. Why do tech folk like yourself seem to be at the forefront of this?
Well, we'd like to drive change, and getting the right people who like to be on the cutting edge and change things. Brittany Kaiser, who is our fantastic chair, was, of course, the whistleblower of Cambridge Analytica, and she did so because she saw something that needed change and decided to speak up. And what we're doing here at Gryphon is exactly the same type of thing, in that Bitcoin mining in an environmentally friendly way with strong ESG principles is possible. And we're happy to have her and the rest of the team that's fully on side with that type of commitment.
Rob, I'm curious just to get your take on Elon Musk's recent comments, the fact that he seems to have such an influence over the price of Bitcoin and Dogecoin recently with just a couple of tweets. I mean, what is that like for someone in the industry who has to watch the reaction in the price just based on something that he simply says?
Right. It's entertaining, for one. Everyone likes a rock star, and he absolutely is the rock star of the tech space right now. And even though Bitcoin is decentralized, there seems to be an inordinate amount of power, at least temporarily, with one individual. But if we take a step back and we look at what he said, I believe what he said will be a changing point for the way Bitcoin is being perceived. He is casting a spotlight on energy use for electricity in Bitcoin, which is relevant. And it is making companies such as ourselves more relevant and more in the forefront with respect to the fact that it is possible to mine Bitcoin with an environmentally friendly process. And companies that do so will start to be getting a premium in the eyes of investors and in the eyes of people looking to buy Bitcoin as well. So I think ultimately speaking, this spotlight that Elon has shown on the area in the space has been very positive.
Is there, with all this discussion of electricity to mine Bitcoin, is there a period of peak Bitcoin? I mean, is there a timeline by which it will have all been mined? And are people like you, are you doing the algorithms to figure that out so you don't get caught?
Well, Bitcoin by design is expected to be produced for many, many years, much longer than probably the lifetimes for most of us. So I'm not too concerned that way. And even when we get to the eventual point where the last Bitcoin is mined, the transaction fees that pay miners will start increasing in order to offset that difference to maintain the network. So I'm not really concerned with just because the last Bitcoin eventually gets mined somewhere out in the distant future, that miners will no longer be relevant because the network still needs to be maintained. And transaction fees will become a bigger portion of the total revenues that get generated for the miners.
Rob Chang, Gryphon Digital Mining CEO, thanks so much for taking the time to join us today.